Welcome to our Watch and Learn Quilting Show today. I'm Johnny Barfus. With me is Kim Sandberg. Today we're going to be talking about starting and ending your quilting. We're going to give you tips and tricks for ways to really perfect the beginnings and endings of your stitching. We'll talk about bringing up your thread, tying off your bobbin, and tying off at the end of a quilt and your end of your stitching. So Kim,
yes,
what are we talking about today?
Well, one of the most important things I think for any new quilter to learn, or even seasoned quilters if they haven't mastered it yet, is how to bring up your bobbin thread at the beginning of stitching and then also at the end, so that you don't have any of those threads hanging around on the back of your quilt when you get done that you have to trim.
Yes.
Right, Johnny?
Yes.
So let's jump into this, and I'm going to show you the basics of getting started and then ending things off. So if you guys look here, down here on the quilt, the first thing is you always want to grab your thread, just that top thread right there. I'm going to grab it and hold on to it. And then on my left handlebar, I'm going to touch the needle down and just do it needle down and needle up one time. Okay? And then you can see that I have a little loop of bobbin thread there. As I continue to hold on to this top thread, I'm just going to move the machine to the side, and look, you guys can see that bobbin thread right there pulling up. Now I'm going to grab a hold of both of those and then bring the machine back so that the needle is right over where I started stitching. And there's a couple of different ways to do tie-offs, but the first way I want to show you is a way that I think a lot of our machine owners don't know about, Johnny, and it's called the walking stitch. And
so really quick, before you go
yes.
with that, we forgot to mention, what we wanted to say is these are things that are applicable to any machine that
yes.
we have.
Yes.
So all of our stand-up or stationary, all of our machines that are stand-up, yep. So the Amara, Forte, Avante, Infinity, Moxie, as well as the Capri.
The Capri. The Sweet is the one that does not, is the only machine that doesn't have this walking stitch capability, okay?
So this is something for everyone.
It's something for everybody. So once again, I'm back. I've got a hold of both my top thread and my bobbin thread with my hand here, and I'm going to touch that button on my left handlebar that's my needle down, needle up, and if I hold it, it just goes down and up. You guys saw that cycle. As a matter of fact, I'll do it again. And if I hold it in place, you can see that it's just stitching up and down. And that's called a walking stitch because it's just walking in place. So you can actually do that at the beginning of your stitching to lock those threads off. So now I've got a good little knot here, and I'm going to do just a little bit of stitching, okay? I'll just stitch a little bit there, and I'm ready to be done stitching. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we do at the end of stitching so that I can bring that bobbin thread up. I've just reached the end of my stitching, and I want to pull up that bobbin thread from the bottom. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab my thread right here in between the needle bar thread guide and the pigtail that's just above it, a little bit higher on the machine, okay? And you guys can see I've got my finger right here. I'm just going to pull it out and loosen that thread up a little bit, okay? Then I'm going to continue to hold onto this thread, and I'm going to move my machine to the side here. And as I do that, I'm going to come down here and grab the thread right here, this top thread, and I'm going to hold on to it as I move my machine back to that same spot, okay? Continuing to hold on to this thread. Once again, I'm going to do my needle down, needle up, just one time. And then I'll move my machine away, and look, there's my bobbin thread being pulled up. Can you all see that? My bobbin thread being pulled up right next to my top thread. Now this is really important. I want to move my machine at least, I would say, a good 3 inches away, my foot, from where I took that stitch, so that I leave a 3-inch tail on my bobbin to get started again. And then I can go ahead and just clip those threads right there. And voila, when I get done, if I clip these other threads, I now have a stitch that I have a tie-off at the beginning. Actually, I'm going to show you how to do a tie-off at the end. I haven't done that yet, but I brought my bobbin thread up. So Johnny, you can see I don't have any bobbin threads to clip on the back, right?
Right. And really quickly, explain how to do that on the Capri.
Okay, so on the
capri,
on the screen, the needle down, needle up icons, there's a arrow that points up and an arrow that points down. To do the walking foot, what you do is just put your finger on that arrow that's pointing down and hold it in place. Sorry, not walking foot, walking stitch.
Right.
You guys know what I mean. Walking stitch, I'm just going to put my finger on that and hold it, and it will go ahead and cycle through, just like we did with this machine. Yeah. So walking stitch, a feature that I'm guessing a lot of you probably didn't even know that you had on your machine.
I didn't know about it until a couple of months ago, literally.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And it's really great to do that tie-off. So that's the tie-off that works for all of our machines. Now, the workaround for the suite is you're just going to hit that needle down, needle up button a couple times, or you can tap the presser foot on the floor. You can tap it a few times to do your needle down, needle up. Okay? So really, it's there on all the machines. So next, let's talk about tie-off capabilities, right, Johnny?
Yes, and you're going to show... Oh, let's point out why.
I have to, yes.
Why you want to pull that machine aside.
Yes, and I want to show you guys why it is so important to take this thread that is here between the... Can you guys see my thread right here? Why we pull here between the needle bar thread guide and the pigtail. Why we loosen it before we move the machine. There's a reason why. It's very important. You can actually, believe it or not, when your thread is pulling against the side of that foot, there's a couple of things that can happen. Number one, you can break your thread more easily because the eye of the needle puts more tension on it. So when you're pulling your machine away, you might snap that thread, which you don't want to have happen. Nobody wants to have to rethread that needle. It can also wear grooves in your foot, believe it or not. This is especially common in the glide foot. So I have a glide foot I want to show you guys here, and I'm not sure how much you're going to be able to see this. We tried to color it with a marker so you can see a little more. But there's actually a little groove that's been worn here in the side of the glide foot, and that happens when you don't loosen that thread, when you don't grab that thread and loosen it before you move it to the side. It pulls against the side of that plastic there, and it will actually create a groove. So the easiest way to avoid that is to just always loosen that thread before you move your machine, right, Johnny?
Yeah, and we had a call or an email about that this week, and that was something that I hadn't really seen before, and then Kelly pointed out that that's from not pulling your thread and giving yourself some tension.
Exactly.
Losing the tension. Can you also explain how Kelly did about the your domestic sewing machine? When you stop stitching, can you explain that? How were you there for that conversation?
I don't know if I was there.
I'm sorry, I'll just tell. So
okay.
when you on your domestic sewing machine, when you're sewing along and you stop and you raise your foot up, it releases the tension on your thread. But on our machines, we don't have that capability. So that's what Kim's doing is showing is how to release that tension on your thread.
On your thread. So when you move your machine, and you guys, I've even seen people wear like kind of grooves in the side of the metal feet, because of the thread rubbing against it. So, so seriously, just take that quick second, create that habit, loosen that thread right there above the needle bar thread guide between there and the pigtail thread tension right there. And it solves the problem.
Awesome.
Yep.
Okay, so now show us how we can do it on the Amara, the Forte. Infinity, what we call our next gen machine.
Our next gen machine. So one of the cool built-in features on these machines is a tie-off, which we can actually set. So let's take a minute and look at the screen here. And you guys are going to see that this screen, I've got the Amara screen in front of a Pro Stitcher screen, okay? So this Amara screen here on the front has right over here, you can see where it says 3, and then there's a knot above it. That is the tie-off. And that's how many stitches it's going to take when I touch that button. And let me show you what you need to do. Now remember, before you do a tie-off, you always want to hold on to that top thread. You want to go ahead and pull up that bobbin thread first before you do a tie-off, and then holding on to both your bottom and your top thread. We'll go back to the screen here so you guys can see. I'm going to push this tie-off button. And then you can see it gives me little instructions there. It says to complete the tie-off, gently move the machine, okay? So all I have to do is just wiggle the machine a little bit, and it just like that. It snaps, and it does just a couple of quick little micro stitches there, which is awesome. Now let's go back to the screen, and I want to show you how to adjust that, because depending on the thread you use might depend on how many tie-offs you want to use. So let's go to our settings tab, and we're going to select the little knot right there. You can see I just turned it green, and you can see here that you can change, I can change my tie-off number to like 5. So Johnny, tell me how many tie-offs you like to have on maybe some different types of thread.
I usually do between 3 and 4. I find 5 is can get too big of a knot, and
Right.
I'm not the best at pulling my thread up like she showed, so I actually can sometimes pull that knot out. So
Okay, gotcha.
if you do too many, it can be too big of a knot.
Right, and I know for me, I will make it less when I'm using a heavier weight thread. So for example, if I'm using like a 30 or a 40 weight thread, I absolutely won't ever do more than 3 tie-offs, unless, there's always an exception, right, Johnny?
Yes.
The exception is if I'm using a really shiny kind of slick thread, then I will do 5. Because those threads, when you pull on them, sometimes they tend to kind of wiggle a little. And if I'm using a really fine thread, like bottom line, which is a 60 weight, or even if I'm using monopoly, which is a clear monofilament that is very, very fine, I will go as high as 7, because I want to make sure that those stitches are locked. I don't want anything to undo.
Right. So now we're going to talk about on the Pro Stitcher
Yes.
and doing tie-offs at the ending and beginning of your using your Pro Stitcher, right?
Using the Pro Stitcher,
And we're going to talk about the difference between tack and micro.
Okay, on the screen, I've selected the settings tab in the top right corner. It's the one with the little gear. And then from the ribbon, let's choose tie-offs. And you notice over here in the sidebar, we've got some options, just like Johnny said. We've got a tack and a micro. Micro is the default setting, right, Johnny? And what is a micro stitch?
Micro stitch?
Yeah.
It's just 2 or 3, whatever you set,
Yeah.
3, 4, 5 little stitches right in a row.
Right.
So it's taking tiny, tiny stitches.
Tiny, tiny little stitches.
Yeah.
Our other option, if you look here on the screen, is
Tack.
tack. Now, tack is like doing a back stitch on your domestic sewing machine. So it's actually going to stitch forward and then stitch back. And so tack is going to leave a little bit more thread visible, right, Johnny?
Yeah.
I personally always use micro.
Same. I use micro usually.
Yeah, I love micro. And just a little tip too, I have found I like to use my tie-offs only when I'm starting and stopping like in the middle of a quilt. So if I'm doing an edge-to-edge design where I'm starting off the edge in the batting, I don't turn on my tie-offs because I'm going to trim that off anyway.
You guys, Kim did a lot of quilting for hire before she came to Handi Quilter, and she's really good about these little tricks that will save you time on your edge-to-edge quilting, and that is definitely one, is turning off your tie-offs, especially if you're doing an edge-to-edge where you're starting off the quilt.
Yeah. Starting off the
It's a good one.
quilt and ending off the quilt, you don't need a tie-off there.
Right.
So you can turn those off. But that's the difference between micro and tack. So now you know, you can choose which one you want to use on your quilt.
Yeah.
Now, we have one other really important thing to talk about, don't we, Johnny?
So we're going to talk about clipping versus burying your thread.
Yep.
So we had a discussion about this the other day, who clips and who buries. So all of us basically here, we all clip our threads.
Yes.
And we discussed that it is really show quilters who are burying their threads.
Right.
I will say I have buried threads in a couple of quilts when I've done hand quilting, and I had a quilt go to QuiltCon that I had to make some changes to. So I did bury the threads on that one.
Right.
But other than that, yeah.
Not so much, not so much. But we know that you're now going to say, wait, what do you mean? So let's show you really quick down here on this quilt. So I have went ahead and pulled up my bobbin thread and I'm holding on to it. I'm just going to do a little bit of stitching and I'm going to end and do a tie off and then go ahead and I'm going to bring my bobbin thread up just the way I showed you guys, using my needle down, needle up, pull it away. If I want to bury my threads, I want to leave a really long tail, but I'm going to show you the difference. So here, because I went ahead and did that tie off, that micro stitch, I'm going to just clip those ones. And I am going to clip them just right there really close, rub my finger over it a little bit, and I have the perfect finish. That is not going to go anywhere. Let's take a look here at this beginning. So I left some pretty long tails here. If you want to bury your threads, what you need to do is, I have my little hand sewing kit here that has all my little hand sewing needles. You just need to get a regular old hand sewing needle out, and you guys can see I've actually got this one threaded just with some regular thread, so you can kind of see it a little bit better. But what you'll do is you'll just take and thread that needle, and then what you do is down here, you just take and you go back into the quilt right where the stitch ended, and just under the top surface of the quilt you go about 1 inch or so. And I normally do this after I've pulled the quilt off the frame.
Right.
I don't do this on the frame. But what I do is I just go ahead and pull that thread so that it is inside the quilt, and then I will clip it. And so that's how you bury a thread. If you're going to be doing some show quilting, or you just really want that final finishing touch, that's how you do it.
More power to you.
Absolutely.
And we definitely support you in that choice.
Yes, absolutely. In the meantime, I'm going to keep clipping my threads.
Okay, I think that's all we have.
Well, let's talk about...
Oh, we have to talk about the quilt behind Kim.
Yeah,
Kim, tell us all about it.
Talking about clipping threads. So this quilt here is one that I actually made last spring. This was my quarantine quilt, my lockdown quilt. I know we all had one. And this has a lot of paper piecing in it. The pattern is from Carl Hensch's book, New York Beauty Blocks and Flying Geese, I believe. So all the flying geese are paper pieced. This was all from my stash, which was really fun. I don't know about you, Johnny. Did you do quilts all from your stash when we were at home?
Yes.
And this is a quilt that I did a lot of tie-offs in. I quilted it mostly with mark and then rulers. And so I had a lot of lines where maybe I didn't travel as well as I should have, so I had a lot of starts and stops. And I just used tie-off. I used tie-offs on all of this, and it quilted up beautifully, and it's held up well. So, yeah.
Another bonkers quilt from Kim.
I know.
Thank you so much for joining us for this Watch and Learn today. We hope you got some good ideas for starting and ending your quilts. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and tune in next week, and have fun quilting.